Good morning and welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are we're now into the next parsha. In many ways, it's a really, really bittersweet parsha of Ki Tissa. And the reason it's bittersweet is that it's this parsha that we read about the golden calf, the incident of the golden calf. But at the same time, we also read the attributes, the 13 attributes of divine mercy. And it's a very, coming right in between all the passages that deal with the construction of the tabernacle. I think it's significant, exactly the placement of this parsha and what happens in it. We don't start off there. We start off discussing various other issues, and in the middle, in where we are right now, is discussing the incense, the ketoret. And the incense was a very holy offering, and for that reason, it was offered up within the tent of meeting itself on the golden altar. And we know of its great power from other incidents in the Torah, where it's used to prevent death from occurring from a plague that is destroying the Israelites. And the incense prevents that from happening. But at the same time, we also know that it's because it's simply very, very powerful, and like other things like atomic power, it has to do with how human beings utilize this power. And so, for example, when Korach rebels against Moses, the test is to bring incense. And of course, we know that they died. We also know that Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, died in bringing incense that was not called for. We also know that physically, our sense of smell is deeply, deeply embedded and highly related to our emotional state. It's in a very deep part of the brain, and we can be very, very deeply influenced emotionally by various kinds of smells. So it's quite possible that all those sorts of things come together as we discuss the various components of the incense. There were two types. One was an incense oil with which they anointed the various parts of the sanctuary, and there was also incense that was used when they brought offerings subsequently. So we're in the middle of verse 25, and here we go. And it's talking about, make sure I have the right place, yes. So we're talking here about it shall be made a oil, in this case, Mishchat Kodesh, of sanctified anointing. Rokach merkachat, expertly blended, Maaseh Rokeach, the work of a expert spice blender, Shemen Mishchat Kodesh. It will be a oil of anointing, sanctified oil it shall be. So let's take a look in here. We were actually in the middle of this. So here we simply are saying, here we go. Rokach. In the part before which we ended last time, he talks about how it has to do with something davar me'urav b'chavero, something mixed in with its fellow, with something else, ad shezeh kupach mizeh, until one is infused with the other, or reach, either through its fragrance or its tam or taste, karui merkachat. It is called a merkachat. This combination of fragrances or tastes, etc. So, rokach. Let me make sure I have the vowels correctly here. Yeah, rokach mirkachat maaser rokeach, right? Rokach mirkachat. Rokeach, right? Asui, this blend that is made al yedei omanut, that has to do with someone who is a craftsman, someone who knows this craft, v'ta'arovot, and perfect blending. Maaseh rokeach, the act of a rokeach, of a craftsman in perfume, like a perfumer perhaps. Shem ha'oman, that is the name of the craftsman, badavar, who is expert in this matter. Umashachta bo, and with this you will anoint et ohel moed, the tent of meeting, ve'et aron ha'edut, and the ark of the pact, right? The covenant, the witnessing. Let's take a look at, see if there's any Rashi on this. Umashachta bo, you're right, you shall anoint with it. Kol ha-meshichot kemin kaf, yavanit. So the chai, right? So all these acts of anointment, the way they looked when they anointed was with this X, that he'd make an X with the oil. Chutz Mishel Melachim, with the exception of the anointing of kings, Shehen Kamin Nezer, in which case he would make a circle around the head of the person of the king to be anointed with that oil. So let's keep going. The et shulchan. So he's mentioning all the different things that were to be anointed, right? That table, this is the showbread table. This was also included in the Mishkan. The et kol kelav, and all its vessels accompanying the table. The et menorah, the candlestick. The et keleha, and its vessels, right? The et misbach haktoret, and there we are, the altar of incense. Here, okay. The et mizbach ha'olah, and then he'd go outside and he would anoint the altar for it's called the mizbach ha'olah, the altar for the burnt offering. But we know there were other offerings that were made on this altar. It was a large altar outside the tent of meeting. The et kol kelav, and all its vessels. The et hakiyor, and the this was the water, the urn that they had to wash their hands and their feet. The et kano, and its base. It sat on this base. The kidashta otam, you shall sanctify them. V'hayu kodesh kodashim, and they shall be most holy. Kol hanogea bahem yigdash, all that touches it, that comes in contact with them, shall be sanctified. And the fact is that this verse here requires interpretation, because by all, it doesn't mean literally every single thing. And Rashi's going to explain that right now, I believe. We'll take a look at it. The kidashta otam, you shall sanctify them. Meshicha zo mikadashtam, I'm going to say, or mikadshtam liyot kodesh. So this particular act of anointing sanctifies them to be sacred, kodesh kodashim, of the most, the highest level of sanctity. Mahi kedushatam, and what exactly is involved in their being sanctified? How are they? So remember, kadosh means distinct, distinguished, etc., something like that. So in what way are they unique? Again, the idea of being unique. And he tells you, kol hanogea, and of course he quotes the text here, anything that touches it. And now he explains. Kol hara'oi lechli sharet, anything which is appropriate to be put into a serving vessel. Misha nichnas letocha, once it's placed in it. So it's not just anything. It has to do with the kinds of various whether it's the oil or wine or meal or something like that, that would normally be placed in such a serving vessel. That's what we're talking about. Kodesh Kedushat Haguf. He says it has essentially um, an intrinsic level of holiness. In other words, the food itself, the oil, the wine, whatever, actually becomes sanctified itself. It now gets this sanctification transferred to it, and the practical element is lehipasel, okay, meaning to, in other words, so that it becomes pasul, it becomes no longer sanctified, biyotze, if it leaves the temple precinct, ulina, or if it is something that was supposed to be consumed or used that very day and was not supposed to be left overnight. Lina means spending the night. Utavul yom, or if someone who is a tavul yom, meaning someone who's in the process of purification, and in some cases, depending on, we've discussed this when we've discussed, had some discussions in the book of Leviticus, but there's certain types of impurity that require a process, and it isn't just a question of waiting. Part of the process is waiting to the next day. Another part of the process may be going to the mikvah, all right, going into the mikvah and immersion, and then waiting till the end of the day. And so they may go and immerse themselves, but still have to wait until nightfall in order to become perfectly purified. In some cases, it involves a sacrifice. They have to bring a sacrifice as part of that purification process. And a tibul yom is a reference, it's a halachic designation of someone who's in the process, has been impure, is in the process of purification, has gone to the mikveh, but still has to wait for Harev Shemesh, meaning sun, literally that would mean sunset, which generally is understood as nightfall. But and so they are not, while they're in the process of purification, they're not completely purified. And what we're saying here is that a person who's a tibul yom comes in contact with one of these items that wound up in one of these vessels, they render it pasul. Ve'eno nifter, let's say lachulim, and these cannot be redeemed. In some cases, something that had been sanctified could be redeemed by paying the equivalent value of it to the temple treasurer, and in that case, and with an added 25% of the value of it. And in that case, it could be redeemed, meaning no longer be in this sanctified state. And we're saying that if something came in contact with one of these vessels that had been anointed in this way, it cannot be redeemed. Let's say lechulin means to come to no longer, literally it needs to go out and be non-sacred. Aval, this is a big but. Aval, but davar she'eino ra'ui lahem. But if it's something that isn't supposed to be in them, if it's some kind of whether it's the kind of oil or the kind of possibly if it's some kind of fruit juice, for example, or something else, okay, that normally they wouldn't be used to transport this or to contain it. If it is not that, ein mekadshin, they don't in fact render this material sanctified. So this is quite a chidush, right? I mean, it's quite a interesting statement because it seems to contradict what the Torah just said. But that's why we need this level of expertise and tradition to help us understand what's going on in the Torah text itself. And you really can't read the Torah text itself without these interpretations and know exactly how tradition understands these texts. So he goes on to say, Ushnuyahi. This is learned out. Mishelo, sorry, let me look at this. Okay, sorry. he sorry, I'm looking to see. Yeah, Mishnah Shlema. It's from an uncontested Mishnah. This is learned in an uncontested Mishnah. You know that many Mishnayot involve disagreements between rabbis. This particular halachic statement in the Mishnah we know is this collection of oral law that was actually written down around the year 200. Okay. This is learned in this uncontested Mishnah, Eitzel Mizbeach, okay? I think this is saying regarding the words that are there, right? Because it states there, Eitzel Mizbeach, near the altar, next, the very following verse has stuff to do with the altar. Here we go. Mitoch shenemar, because it stated, Exodus 29, Kol hanogea b'mizbeach yikdash. It says anything that touches the altar will become sanctified. Shomea ani, I learn out of this. I can infer from this because it says anything that touches the altar. I learn out of this. Bein ra'ui, bein she'eno ra'ui. I would think, right, that this meant whether it was something that was normally put on the altar, that was fitting to put on the altar, or something that wasn't fit to put on the altar. Talmud Lomar. And for this reason, the Torah goes on to say kvasim. It goes on to say lambs. It designates lambs. Ma kvasim ru'uyim. So we learn from that just as lambs are what is put up on the altar, af kol ra'ui. That means that what the Torah is trying to tell us is anything that is fitting to put on the altar. Kol Meshichat Mishkan v'Kohanim, when it comes to the anointing of the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, the Kohanim and priests. I think this is actually a new subject, right? So there really is a period here. Kol Meshichat Mishkan v'Kohanim, all the anointing of the Mishkan and the priests, umalachim, and the kings, mitargem lashon rivui, the miturgam lashon rivui. So when the Targum translates that, it translates it as this act of initiation here, right? Is a rivui, as an increase in rank, that placing this oil on them, anointing them, is an indication that their rank has gone up. Lefi she'ein tzorech meshichatan, because the purpose of anointing them is only ella ligdula. The purpose is only to indicate that they have increased in rank. Kichen yasad hamelech. So it says, this seems to mean, for thus the king established shezeh chinuch, right? That this is their installation, gdulatam, of their greatness. That's what that act of anointment represents. Usha'ar meshichot. However, other acts of anointment, kagon rekikin, meshuchin, for example, when they anoint these wafers that they were going to put up on the altar, okay, and then he quotes Amos, Vereshit shmanim yimshachu, meaning they will be anointed with chief anointments, lashon arami, okay. Oh, I want to make sure I'm getting this. Okay. Lashon Aramit Bahen, when he translates those, he makes the point that when the Targum translates that, Kalashon Ivrit, that the Targum also uses the Hebrew term for anointing them. So that he's saying, what Rashi is saying is that the Targum has a reference interprets in its language the nature of these anointments, that the distinction we made between the anointments of stuff that went on the altar, or the food, things like that, that had to do with giving them an intrinsic level of holiness. But regarding the Kohanim, or the let's see, okay, I'm going to make sure I okay, sorry, okay, that the Kohanim and the priests and the kings were different, and I want to make sure that I put correctly. Okay, so Afkol Ra'oi. I think this Kol Meshichat Mishkan is referring to, so this actually belongs, the fact that this doesn't have periods in here, of course, makes it extra challenging for me to try to make sure I understand it correctly. So I think here he's ending this right here, saying that any of the anointments that were involved in the items that were used in the tabernacle, right, were actually to do with things that were fitting to be set up on the altar, etc., and that they have to do with a level of sanctification. Whereas when it came to the Kohanim and the Malachim, right, there it's simply saying that they're now distinguished in rank, but it's not necessarily that they are on a higher level of holiness in the sense that we would refer to, for example, the wafers that were placed, or the meal offerings that all had oil of anointment on them. And I'm going to stop here, and I hope I haven't made it more confusing than it is already. So let me make sure I get the right place where we ended. Okay, right here. So we're at verse 30, and I'm going to stop the share. And there we are. So again, we really are focusing in on what's going on in this Mishkan, and on the broadest level, of course, we're saying and getting some sense that when you are entering this level of connection with something that is sanctified, these are all considerations that one has to take into consideration as part of this process, to really be mindful in a very profound kind of way. So I'm happy to leave it open for a moment if you want to record anything. Otherwise, I will stop here.